everybody by name and company, and then we'll go back and let them do a little longer self-introduction. So all the way on the right, we have Kevin Weston with Float. And then we have Kenneth Lund with Avaya. We have Mariel Vargas with Macy's.com. And then we have Matt Allred with Walmart.com. And we have Scott Amyx with Amyx McKinsey. Yeah. All right, so go ahead, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Weston. I'm the CEO of Float, and Float is a design and technology agency just up the street in Jackson Square. Our specialty is really in designing experiences primarily around the Internet of Things. So we've worked with a wide range of devices from Connect through to the new HoloLens to smartwatches to connected devices. One thing we have done recently that's about to be announced, and you're going to see today at the back of the room, is a shelf we've developed that is a very simple interactive shelf using just a camera. You can turn any shelf, any screen, any product into a connected device without needing to change it. So hopefully later you can take a quick look. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kenneth Long. I am the Director of Line of Business Marketing at Avaya. We're a engagement and collaboration technology company. You may have seen some of our billboards. We're the sponsor of the Avaya Stadium for the San Jose Earthquakes. And also just doing some stuff with NASCAR. So our company's business is engagement and collaboration technology. My personal background has a lot of retail, including fashion. I was with Cisco and IBM with their retail technology group. I also did one project with a designer called Simon Spur, who's now the creative director for Ken and Kerwin. And we basically, about 5 years ago, did a whole bunch of things, which now is easy, but back then was heavy lifting at San Francisco, in New York Fashion Week. So glad to be here.
Hi. I'm Mariel Vargas, and I'm Senior Product Manager at Macy's.com. And currently, I'm focused on strategy and vision of how customers find prime products. So I've been mainly focused just purely online for the past 8 years. Some of the major things I've worked on are brand new search platform for both Macy's.com and Bloomingdale's.com, as well as a lot of focus on algorithms and matching algorithms of how you match products. So mainly very focused on purely on customer service.
Hi, I'm Matt Allred. I'm the Director of Apparel, Shoes, and Jewelry for Walmart.com. Walmart is a very large retailer with stores across the country that you may have heard about.
I didn't say that.
Unfortunately, not in San Francisco. Since you didn't say about Macy's.
Okay, that's okay.
I have the apparel, shoe, and jewelry businesses really looking to close the gap and make sure that everything is accessible to our customers anytime, anywhere, no matter where they are, that they can pick it up in a store, have it shipped to them, anything that works, and really have enjoyed transitioning from our brick-and-mortar businesses into e-commerce over the past 4 years.
Great, thank you.
Oh, there you go.
So my name is Scott Amyx, and I'm the founder and CEO of Amyx and McKinsey, and we are a boutique strategy consulting firm, and we specialize just specifically in wearables and IoT. There was an article that just came out on Information Week where we provided a fairly in-depth analysis around how to create a privacy playbook for wearables and IoT. And I think today's topic is one of those things where it's exciting, but at the same time there are some implications that we need to be very mindful of. So we provided something very practical. In addition to that, we also play at a very industry level. We're part of Ocean Alliance, as well as really speaking on behalf of the industry at both the wearable spectrum as well as the IoT spectrum. Our clients range from large enterprises to small startups, and I get involved with just about everything as well as our agency. But one of the things we've done, and I'll talk about it a little bit today, is we've actually spun off a startup to focus on exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm very excited. And it uses a facet of artificial intelligence called effective computing cognitive science. So I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes.
Great, fantastic. Can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good. So,
are you about to start?
Yeah.
Okay. We want to make sure that mics on this side are working, so we're going to test it.
Oh, good. Okay. You might have been seems that one. It might have been the volume.
Testing, 1, 2. It is gaining, but it's barely. Testing.
Is it on?
Testing. Testing.
Yeah, that's good, right?
One,
Okay.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, so I'm Robert Nixon. I'm one of the executive producers of Retail Tech Summit. I'm also VP at Retail Design Institute, Northern California, and I work with Owen. And like he said, we run San Francisco Fashion Merchants Alliance, Inc., which is a 501c3 nonprofit. We're the largest fashion industry organization in terms of education and economic development in California. And we focus on technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship in fashion, retail, wearables, and other design industries. We can talk to you about that too. So the first question I want to throw out there to set up, what is your definition of Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, Universe of Everything, or Connected Planet, etc.? So like, how does everyone define this?
So we decided that we are going to give you, or give it to everyone,
Okay.
or open to discussion, obviously, a retail answer and then a geeky answer.
Okay.
So basically we define it in 3 major aspects. The first is a product or a thing, sorry, you can't hear me, that does something on your behalf. So, for example, you know, it's going to warm up your car for you, and I'm giving a non-retail example, but more of a non-automotive example. A product or thing, so secondly, a product or thing that tells you to do something or gives you information. So you go into your closet and, you know, whatever the thing is tells you, hey, this is the weather, I suggest you wear this. And then 3, you as the product itself, where you walk into a store and your experience is personalized because you're the product. So that's, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I would agree with you. I think it goes down to how does it make your life easier,
Exactly.
right? And so if it's the shirt that knows you've worn it 3 times and now it needs to be washed, not that you should have to have a shirt to do that, but, or if it's the razors that as you pull out your last one automatically go and place an order versus you having to have a subscription. It's just the minute things that make your life
Anybody else?
So we talked on the geeky side. I came up and be glad to get some input. I look at it from a technical perspective. It's really the definition of IoT is it's a device or an object. So there's a physicality to it that either collects information, collects data, so it has sensors in it, or it can act on data. So if it doesn't have a sensor, then it has some sort of motor or something that allows it to react to external data. So the key here is you gotta have data somewhere in that thing, and then connect it to another entity. That entity could be another thing, or it could be a computing or a data center or a cloud, over a network. Now, the network could be wired, wireless. We're basically keeping it generic. So from a technical architecture perspective, it limits it to an object, a thing, network connectivity, and data. Those are the 3 major technical elements. If anybody else has.
Right, and please. Well, I was just going to say that we wrote an article on Wired several months back, and the way we like to explain the notion of wearables and IoT is that, well, first of all, sometimes wearables tend to be considered a subset of IoT, but they're not exactly. Perhaps a metaphor that makes a little bit more sense is that of concentric circles. So wearables or nearables, ingestibles, on your clothing, all of these things represent what we call body area network, meaning you are the network and it's on you, inside of you, or near you. And then as we move out in concentric circles, then we get into our near environment, right? So I don't want to use a more technical term, but these things represent like your connected home, connected cars, and connected work, things that you have on a regular basis. Then on a larger scale, we get into the industrial things, which we call the wireless area sensor network. And it's really the ability to be able to connect with things, not just only through the gateway, but also even using a mesh network decentralized mechanism as well. So there's many topologies around wireless sensor network, but that's really what we're talking about. Now, where is this going? And I think our retailing experts here started to allude to this, is The notion is that these sensing capabilities, including the ability to have an SO chip built inside, can actually start to understand context, your external stimuli, your physiological information, like your biometric information, as well as your intent, your behavior. And it effectively gets to a point what we call ambient computing. So when we spoke at when I spoke at JCK in Las Vegas about a week and a half ago, we talked about this notion of a virtual assistant. Now, for some of us, we may have a point of reference in terms of what that means. Perhaps it's Siri, perhaps it's Cortana, but it's the ability of this artificial intelligent being where it's not a singular device, but it's an ecosystem where you as an actor, as you move about your house, your work, and the environment actually collects information from the wall, from the Wi-Fi, from your clothing and all these things, and starts to actually make sense of what you're trying to do. Now it has huge implications for retail that I will talk about, and I'll just leave you with the terminology and I'll stop here. It's called O2O, online to offline.
Great. Well, that's very, and then Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add, we just covered a fair amount of ground there, and ultimately to me it's about, the first things first is it's about some form of electronic device connected to the internet fundamentally. But one of the things I find useful is to think about is really two modes. There's something that's passive, and that means it's collecting information, and there's something that's active, and there's something I engage with. So for example, I could be walking around the store with my phone, and I choose to engage an app that's telling me about things on the shelf through beacons. That's an active engagement. There's a passive one that's just tracking me with my phone app in the background, collecting information that might be used for me or for someone else. But one thing I found when we think about these things is when you start mixing those two things up, if you're not careful, it gets really confusing really quickly. Because from a user perspective, sometimes you want to think about the user experience when it's active, and sometimes you want to think about it when it's passive.
Good. Is everyone confused early, or we covered a lot of ground there? Yeah. So we'll go back through this again. Okay, so specific to retail. So what is the IoT opportunity in terms of retail? So what problems will it solve? What problems will it create? And how will consumers actually benefit from everything everybody just said?
So I think the IoT opportunity in retail, like I said earlier, is how do we make things so simple and easy for our customers that they don't even have to think about them? So that, you know what, everything is connected and it just automates. I don't want to have to think about replenishing items for my house. I live in San Francisco, so I can't keep very much on hand. How does my life just flow continually so that I'm not having to think, you know what, I need to go pick up razors, or I need milk, or I need these other things. Does my refrigerator order for those and they're delivered to my office, or are they already in my trunk when I go and get in my car after work? To me, those are the things that I'm looking for and kind of solves as it relates to apparel, specifically maybe my shoes know when they're getting worn out and it sends me an email. I don't know what that looks like, but it's engaging and just making it so simple that I never have to think about it.
Yeah, so the one thing I want to add is that it's not only going to be beneficial for the customer, but also for retailers, where one of the major things we struggle with is correct inventory planning, and returns, as well as it will increase sales as well. So it's a win-win for both the customer as well as a retailer with one of those three major pain points.
So the ultimate goal, even though it layers upon layers upon layers right now, is simplification. Okay. Anybody else have anything to add on there?
Well, I think the other key word is efficiency.
Inefficiency. Okay, well,
Right.
and speaking of...
Yeah, I was going to actually elaborate a little bit. So there's the demand-driven supply network side, which has to do with the operation, the supply chain mechanism of retailers, which is incredibly important. So for example, People Power Company, which is a home automation startup that's really well funded, as well as iControl Networks and Earth out of Europe, are tackling some of the most interesting things around home safety, environment, and so on and so forth in relation to your connected home. But one of the things that's really interesting is that People Power actually provides you with these sensors that you can actually attach it to things inside your house. So he jokingly talked about how he actually places onto his, I think, cognac or something to that extent. So his teenager, if he touches it, you know, the dad gets notified that that $5,000 cognac was touched, as an example. But where we're going with this on the demand-driven supply network side is pretty much what they had alluded to, which is the sensor miniaturization is going to get to a point where instead of using an Amazon QR scanner to replenish your inventory, these sensors are going to be on your milk bottle, on your Clorox bleach. So as it actually goes through a certain threshold in terms of replenishment, it will actually send a signal through your Wi-Fi, through your gateway, to the factory floor to manufacture that one more additional unit, as well as to make sure that unit gets placed into the nearest store you typically shop. So it has huge implication on the demand planning side, and of course that has huge implication on the cash flow and just the overall operation. For me, I think in addition to that, what gets really exciting is the brand engagement, where, you know, you'd be surprised, but, you know, one thing that I always ask people is, why do you make certain decisions, whether it's a car, house, lover, or spouse? Well, it's really not just based on facts and figures, but it's also based on your emotions. The fact that we're sentient beings means that there are certain perceptions, the way we perceive the world. And if you can understand systematically how you perceive the world, then there's actually some tremendous advantages. Online, they probably use sentiment analysis, which is the analysis of social media, tweets and emoticons, emoji. What we're talking about is an opportunity to use wearables and IoT to be able to ascertain everything from your cognitive load to your emotional detection and recognition. So if you're interacting with a particular product, we can actually start to understand your favorability. You take that on a larger scale, let's say a shopping center, we can actually have aggregate information around when they passed by Victoria's Secret, in aggregate they felt sexy. Or when they passed by the pretzel shop, they felt hungry. So there's a lot of interesting things that can be provided, and I think that's the real intelligence. And there's studies that just came out that talks about the fact that consumers want personalized retail experience. So what we're talking about is an in-store, real-time support around purchase decisions.
I think you brought up an interesting point. That capability leads to the other part of the question, which is the potential problem that you also talked about, you wrote about relating to privacy.
Well, I just think that, you know, it's interesting. All going back to making it simple for the customer is actually tremendously complicated on the back end. So it's got to be so seamless to them as they're walking through that shopping experience that everything is personalized for them. And so it's very easy as a customer, but rather complicated as the retailer or the company provider.
So let's follow in with that. So, you know, the traditional retail industry advantages. So we have economies of scale, large IT budgets, you know, established supply distribution partners, things like that. How is that going to change? So if people are just for small retailers or you know, new retail entrepreneurs and stuff like that, when they focus, are we talking about actually a larger investment initially to start to reap the benefits of Internet of Things connectivity? What will be?
Well, I think as you know, as a product manager and working in Agile, you definitely want to iterate, and you want to start, you know, in phases. So I think one of the first phases.
Oh, you gotta hold it up.
Oh, sorry. One of the first phases. Sorry. One of the first phases I would say is ensuring you have very clear customer segments to then give a semi-personalized experience, and then that will then migrate to, emerge to a true personalized experience when you, and this is what I'm talking about in store right now, there is more opportunity to have those personalized experiences online, but in store is just having those very clearly defined through your data and through your analytics, those customer segments.
So set process through personalization. The one thing though, we talk about ultimately for an industry, it sounds great, it's very complicated on the back end, but is there a point where everything's going to be simpler and less expensive? Are we going to still have to make huge capital expenditures in terms of IT in order for even mid-sized and small people to compete?
Yeah, if I could address that. So, interestingly enough, I actually spoke with 2 startups in this arena today. One is actually working on something called a campaign management system. So, when you receive a promotion, offer, loyalty, reward, there is an actual campaign system management that's working behind the scene that sets the campaign, sets the business rules and the trigger points. Well, we are actually working the process of being a strategic partner with IBM and Silverpop. But in addition to that, the startup that came to us is also looking to create a CMS specifically for wearables and IoT. And the fact that it's cloud-based is very scalable, so I'll stop there. This other startup, which is in stealth mode that we're in talks with, is working on the data aggregation, because for a retailer or an advertiser, one of the things that's very difficult is they have to deal with a lot of heterogeneous data, SQL, non-SQL data, and integrating that data becomes very difficult and making sense of it. So that's one piece. Then they add a layer of optimization as well as the predictability, so that they basically feed into the DSP as well as all the different channels that a typical retailer will use. Thirdly, the concept or the technology that we're building, we actually demoed it at Las Vegas, is able to actually do multi-modalities. So let me try to break it down into something that's more concrete. Facial recognition, voice analysis, body language, hand gestures, physiological information from your sensors, heart rate variability, blood volume pulse, to environmental things, that's computer vision based, geolocation based, indoor positioning, and just environment around, because I'm telling you, we're going to go away from just a plain beacon to beacon type of technology and the awareness factor all over a retail store. I gave 2 examples. One was at a Louis Vuitton. When a shopper, even before that person enters the store, there is actual technology that's assessing the aggregate reaction of customers before they come in. When they come into the store, there is, again, anonymous way to be able to ascertain what the immediate reaction is, because when we go into a store, within the first half a second, we kind of have a sense, oh, I love this feel or love this ambience. Well, this system is able to start to analyze and be able to detect that. Then as you go through the various visual merchandising areas and down to the product possibly, we can actually look for favorability across primary and advanced emotions using using different things. And then ultimately that becomes a trigger to the campaign management system that says, if this person feels great about this purse that's only $150,000, do go ahead and present this message that they are qualified for a VIP concierge service, as an example.
So does that mean that these services will be available to everyone without the large infrastructure spend? Is that what we're saying?
That's right. So what
the competition level in terms of actual resources is going to drop, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about the campaign management system. So we're going from legacy systems to cloud-based, and that cloud-based is further getting refined specific to wearables and IoT. That's one. And then our technology, as an example, will be priced in such a way that it's really based on transactions or impressions. So there's a certain monetization way to do it in a way that makes sense economically for retailers. So, correct. So the scalability is huge, and you start to bring down the marginal costs incrementally on some of these transactions. And fundamentally what you're doing is you're basically providing an on-target message or promotion to that retailer at the right time. And then we follow them all the way through offline as well and online. It's a full circle, and that's actually a very complex concept that most of you may not understand. But the things that you can do online, such as cart abandonment, we can start to do offline. As an example.
The one tiny thing I will add that, for a traditional retailer like Macy's.com, one of the key things that we're doing to prepare, one of the things that we're doing to prepare for this even more so omni-channel world is, in the past we had buyers, and though it's not sexy and it's not, it's not a sexy data thing. There was a very key strategic decision to, in the past we had buyers for stores and then buyers for online, as well as marketing for online and buying for stores. So now we've actually merged that into one, which is key for traditional retailers to have a seamless and omni-channel experience for the customer. So that tiny, simple thing is going to be huge to ensure we are successful in IoT.
Speaking to the investment, I would just say, regardless, it's an investment that most of us aren't making today, right? So, so whether you're paying a small percent, which on a lot of sales can add up very, very quickly, right, or whether you're investing in it yourself, it's definitely an investment. And it's something, similar to when search hit a lot of us as retailers, and it was something that we hadn't encountered before. for, it's definitely something that you've got to invest in and make in somewhere to your plan.
I think just to add to that, I think, you know, with our shelf technology, for example, one of the biggest challenges right now is even getting the stores connected. Like just connecting anything to a Wi-Fi network in a store, for example. I think personally we're 10 to 20 years away from that being ubiquitous. Easy for retailers, for brands to connect into the store. It's extremely expensive. Big stores are doing it. New and up and coming stores are doing it. But the mid range guys, it's a really, really high investment. What I think it really comes down to is the business model changing. I think my friend here started to allude to that. It's like getting people to pay, the brands to pay more because they recognize the advertising value they're getting through these things. Right now, unless that changes, there's plenty of stores out there that want to make the investment, and there's lots of new stores that come through. It will change over time, but I still think it's a significant time frame. I know you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I absolutely disagree with what he said. And the reason I say that is because there is actually technology where, if you've heard of Levi, it basically, instead of using a radio frequency technology, it uses the light spectrum to deliver basically the internet connection itself, and it's actually much more dense. In addition to that, the plugs are the future, and it's actually available now. This is not 4 or 5 years out. The plugs will become a Wi-Fi router. So everything inside the building in itself can actually start to connect. And we're also talking about OpenGARN, which is an open source technology that provides peer-to-peer decentralized network. And there's also technology that uses low bandwidth for maximizing that even further, up to like 20-mile radius.
I think the question is kind of the adoption rate, though, in the industry. Because a lot of these things have been around for quite a long time. Actually, it's the adoption rate.
I mean, I lived it when I was at Cisco, and I was laughing when he said that. If any of you are doing retail tech right now, one thing you will find when you talk to any major retailers, and I know you've got disclosures to worry about, so I'm not going to ask you a very pointed question, but I can tell you every retailer, every chain retailer at Union Square you talk to, you ask them, hey, can I just get some bandwidth to power my new application? You will find that despite, that's the #1 problem. The infrastructure that retailers have invested for the last 10 years plus in terms of store infrastructure is fixed. The ability to put bandwidth inside the store is fixed, it's contracted. And adding bandwidth to the store is probably, I think the term, I talked to a big retail chain recently on an RFP. I personally like this thing. It's as painful as doing root canal and spinal surgery concurrently without painkillers. It is that painful for a retailer that's got a medium to large size chain to upgrade bandwidth into the store. Now, you hear the stories of Apple placing stores in the backbone to get maximum pipe. Those are the exceptions. You are developing technology, you're hoping to sell it to a retail store. If that is not data center, not online, but store. Keep that in mind. With some of these startups, they say, oh, how hard is it to get extra bandwidth inside the store next week? Try next year.
I would agree with you on the difficulty, but I would also say,
You
in
are
terms
going
of
to
the
do it.
timing, in the competitive landscape in which we do business today, it is simply not an option, and people can't afford not to, and I think it will happen sooner than later.
I think the other key cost that's often overlooked is content. The more visual the world becomes, the more expensive it becomes. Now, there's obviously things like Pinterest and Instagram and things that can deliver user-generated, curated content, but we find increasingly, the challenge of, the brands have to make the investment in, they want a message to come up, for example, or on a phone, or whatever. It's all a cost on a channel. Now, again, I still think it comes back to business model change. It's about having the brands pay into the retailers more in order to get the presence that the Internet of Things brings to them, irrespective of where you purchase that product. In some instances, for certain categories, there's a combination of things that has to happen here, but fundamentally, these are significant investments.
I think we should also mention here too, because there are two things on a kind of a macro level going on, and especially in San Francisco, some other development areas. Retailers are often saturated, inundated with requests for private data, for development partners, things like that. How do you pick and choose? Like, you become numb to it after a certain extent. And the other thing is that when we're talking about kind of fast-moving development areas with a lot of startup activity now, so like retail technology, startup and stuff, we're pre-consolidation, right? So it's a wild west in some respects. There's all kinds of startups, like thousands doing the same type of thing. But at some point, the industry is going to have a shakeout, a consolidation, right? And then we'll see, the best practices come, and then we'll see the 1, 2, and 3 for each category that do those best practices the best, right? So right now, it's kind of hard to gauge how things are going, right? But a lot of stuff is out there. I think adoption is a big thing, and who do you adopt in retail with the largest legacy infrastructure, probably economically in the U.S.? There's a lag time already, right? And so even if we have innovation knocking at the door, where do you go, what do you do is already there. So there's an inherent lag time in the industry.
Right, especially if you look at retail, brick and mortar retail is driven by population. Your concentration of stores are driven by population centers, and the population centers are Eastern Seaboard, West Coast, and then smattering in the middle. Sure, you're in a high density area. You can do a little more flexible, but remember, you may have a store in a strip mall somewhere that isn't as easy, to drive innovation. That's why you have innovation centers in Silicon Valley. Macy's.com and Walmart.com are located here because you can get things a lot easier here.
The one thing I will say from the traditional retailer perspective is that we've spent, the past almost 10 years focusing on improving our desktop, now mobile, very quickly experience, but the in-store experience has pretty much remained unchanged. And if you go into the store and see the person that checks you out, they're probably using an older, 1993 computer. So it's just a matter of waking up and realizing that technology is now everywhere. And investing as much as we have, on all the different, devices and carrying that through to the in-store experience, which is going to be necessary.
I have a good follow-up question on that. So it says technology and innovation are closely linked to experimentation, but how much can you realistically experiment with or evolve a brand or the retail context?
Yeah, so let me speak to this. Part of the reason we're actually very selective about the kind of experiences that we like to partner up is because not every company is an innovator or an early adopter, and that just speaks to the crossing the chasm. But we look for leaders like Walmart, like Macy's.com, that are at the forefront, are leading some of these trends. So I can't name this one company, but they are a publicly traded $14 billion company, and they provide hospitality service all over the globe. So they're looking to potentially bring us into their lab environment, try out our technology, and then pilot it at a particular specific store. Now the opportunity is, if that goes well, then all of a sudden we have instant scale across the globe. And we're talking about a very large opportunity. That's the kind of opportunity we're talking about. And the exciting thing is there are a handful, not everybody's going to adopt, but there are a handful of leaders that sees what we're talking about, that's going to set them apart, where the experience is so unique for the end shopper that is so compelling. So one of the key KPI objective for this company that I'm talking about in a nebulous fashion is same in-store sales increase, meaning they want to be able to drive sales. That's what it comes down to. And they want to have higher loyalty, higher retention. So how do you do that? And retargeting is a big component as well. In-store digital signage, messaging that's personalized to that shopper.
So how much are they willing to change the actual, let's say we're talking about physical store, the actual retail store design elements of it? That's one thing. I think you said that a lot of that stays the same. So, are we going to see designed massive changes on the physical store design level due to, connected systems?
I would say, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything has to evolve, and no one wants to be left behind. And so where you spoke about that unique, very forward experience, those unique special experiences of today will become the standard of tomorrow. And no one in a retail can afford to be left behind that curve, so they will all be evolving to get the most efficiency. It still comes down to sales per square foot, and if that can be done better, leveraging an online footprint or leveraging some of these technologies, they will absolutely be doing that.
I think we're starting to see it. I mean, Retail Next and Shop Track recently both raised significant amounts of money, fairly basic counts, but starting to get data about how many people are going in the stores. I think Scott talked about it. There are individual cases of tracking people around stores, product level data. This is starting. And what it does need is some people to show significant wins to force people to move faster and reconfigure stores and to understand more about how this will change things. But it's just, I think it's a momentum issue, and you know, the companies that are in the middle and the big companies that can't turn quickly, they're the ones that most of the danger here.
Well, you know, we deal with a lot of luxury, you know, fashion, retail, things like that, and then you know you have obviously the goodwill of investment in the brand, right, is enormous. So I mean, how much, even if you want to keep up with everybody else, but then you have certain standards, you have craftsmanship, and whatever you do has to reflect positively on that the signature brand elements, right? So is there any breakdown we can do between say mass market retail and specialty retail or high-end retail in terms of adoption or change with brand and store design?
I was talking to recently with Jeff Roster, he was the senior analyst at Gartner Retail, and he just left, so I can actually quote him now without having to worry about Gartner. And we talked about, it was a rather funny experience. I took 4 pictures of 4 different stores when I was up in Vancouver. The Apple store, the Samsung store, the local Shaw store, and at that time before they shuttered, the Sony store. And I laid them all in one picture, masked the label, and sent it to them and said, can you figure out which one is which? And they actually had trouble because what happened was everybody was copying the Apple store. And then now you're starting to see there are some changes, but I think one thing him and I talked about was the idea that future retail store design needs to be flexible, just like a web page can be flexible. Web page, you can flip a change overnight, you can do A/B testing. Kind of tough to do that in the store, but, and I've seen some of the prototype, stuff that you can do. But I think future retail store design can take into account that things will change. So you see fixtures that will move around. You see, lots of power outlets, especially in network drops. Guest power chargers. Thank you very much. Love it, because all your customers are needing power chargers. So something I think the key is flexibility, because your store physical design has to be as dynamic as much as possible as a website design. So you can put in, for example, technology like shelf reading or video technology, etc. It can't be store resets every 2 years.
But I think at that point, it's got to stay true to the brand.
Yes.
Do I think that Louis Vuitton is going to look like the Apple store next week? Right. Probably not. But I do think that they will evolve, and those luxury retailers will be even faster and under more pressure even than some of the larger mass players. It's the customer that detects the pace at the end of the day. Similar to the way customers have shifted to mobile, I think a little faster than the industry anticipated. It is definitely the customers that will set the pace, not the retailers themselves.
So I have two data points. One is there is a company that's doing exactly what we're talking about, which is actually testing how people actually use a certain space, and it's specific to a premium airline, and it's the VIP lounge at an airport. So they've actually outfitted with a lot of different sensors to be able to understand what are people using, where are they sitting, at what time, and what type of activities are they actually participating at that point. And they're actually using that kind of information to inform them around the redesign of that lounge, as an example. The other point that I was going to give is that when I spoke at KAIST, which is Korea's MIT, I gave them something a little bit more conceptual, that's much further out. But one of the things is, when we think about IoT, we think about sensors and inanimate objects, but actually IoT also includes robotics as well. So it may seem a little bit kind of daunting, you probably look at me with a grimace, but the future, decades out, the future of visual merchandising is that it can morph. So that your module display can actually have wheels. It can actually have a motor. And there's an intelligence that communicates with the back end. And based on the data, based on the day, the time, and the type of user, it actually morphs. Because I can tell you, Saturday is a very different experience at a Macy's store, physical store, than say a Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So what do you then basically present based on the personas that come through? Very important. And frankly, it's a very reactive current state where they have to look at the sales data, merchandising, product master, and say, and like what actually moved, and how do we then update the merchandiser and the visual merchandiser? It's very reactive. What we're talking about is potential almost real-time, almost daily optimization. That is, again, I apologize, it's conceptual, but it's pretty powerful.
And potentially even then add the personalization element, depending on the traffic, that you're actually serving up to that specific customer what they are most likely to purchase or need, which is simple and clean to them, but again, very difficult from the retailer.
So if we talk about this, we'll talk a little about so in terms of retail experience, customer experience, we'll talk about touch points. So there's a functional touch point, and then there's an emotional touch point. So with the Internet of Things, connected systems, are we talking more about functional touch points for consumer experience or emotional? So brand element, things like that. Where do we stand on this?
Going back to the first point I made about passive versus active,
right.
It really depends. And I think it also depends, we find with our technology, there's a very different sale between something which is providing better information or comparison to something that's providing a brand image of why I should buy this particular sneaker or whatever. So I think it can be everything. It's really down to the brands that are smart about it and very cohesive at the very highest level. And I don't think that's going to change. It still depends on an overall campaign and an overall strategy for a particular brand.
Well, that's why we break down kind of the luxury and high-end retailers versus the other people too, because I would think that for technology, the functionality, best practice, clean interface, things like that. But I would think that they might be particularly interested in things that enhance the emotional touch points, right? So the connected systems in terms of the emotional touch points.
Yeah, I think ultimately, I think it's 100% functional, 100% emotional, where it's
the end goal
okay. Is the wholly equal 100%. So it's 100% blended because you want it to be practical as well as emotional. So that's.
I absolutely agree, but I would also add that differentiating the luxury versus the mass here, I want to be careful with, because I think that the customer expectations really come to be very similar, and I think as you look at the repeat and some of the simplistic elements, outside of maybe a small percent of people in this country, how often are you going to a Louis Vuitton? How often are you doing some of these experiences versus a Macy's or a mass retailer where you may be in there weekly or every other week, and there's that newness and that element of your shopping for very
Well, I think that's where customer segments, having very clearly defined, 5 customer segments where it doesn't have to be necessarily personalized for the customer, but you fall into this category, so I'm going to show you this experience.
Category management, I think, is the other way you can segment it, is you can segment it by, I think, certain categories, jewelry being one of them, and that one has a certainly much more emotional element in terms of the portraying of touch point and the kind of content that's pushed through versus milk and toilet paper. And the same person needs both. As my girlfriend would tell me, it's like, I want a jewelry and I want you to pick up a paper towel. Not from the same store. But
if you forget the paper towels, you might need to buy her.
So let's talk about, a lot of what we do here, the point of this is economic development, and I don't know if you know this, but your demographic typically for us, for our events, are startups and entrepreneurs and industry professionals, a lot of students, and a lot of design folks in different areas, things like that. So in terms of development, we talk about Internet of Things development for functionality versus kind of an emotional touch point. Where do you think we stand in terms of development for each category? Functional touch point versus emotional touch point. So to try and identify, if you're thinking about an idea, you have an idea, you want to do a startup, or you have an idea for future development, where you want to put your resources. Is there more? I think overall there's more development actually on the functional side, and then the emotional side is a lot more difficult, but it could be a very rich development market, right?
Emotional is about content. Functional is about technology.
Right.
Now, but one leads the other. You use the word touch point.
Yep.
That's how we think about things. It's just a piece of data, something was touched. The emotion is on the content, and it's no different from a web campaign or a TV commercial or whatever. I think, but going back to, tying into the previous question, I think one thing that has to happen as well in the overall scheme of things is that an Internet of Things strategy has to be fit within the right department of the companies out there. Because one thing I've seen is, with lots of digital signage going into stores, there's a great promise of it being dynamic and it can change every day, and now we can connect it to things and it can feed in from the Internet of Things. But one of the problems I think we had in the industry is often that's managed by a store manager, a brand manager at the store level, and then the Uber campaign is controlled by the global brand manager. What's happening in the store is much closer to an internet business. It should be very dynamic, it happens a lot. And the Internet of Things is only going to make that more powerful, more immediate, more tied to data. But for companies, I'm only just seeing that shift where the companies, brand teams of the brands themselves are starting to understand that these things are all tied together and you can't have them separate because not always the right person's in the right place. A perfect example is one of the major gas companies that put screens in all of its gas pumps, and the whole idea there was it was going to deliver dynamic data, but they gave it to the wrong group and they just show CNN. 40,000 screens. Again, same thing in stores. It's one thing to show a video, it's nothing to make it a dynamic, interactive thing that's tied to the Internet of Things, and some of it relates to, again, business models and restructuring to actually be efficient, to actually make this work.
I was going to say, we're very bullish on the emotion side. That's part of the reason why we're actually pursuing this. We think that the spectrum is a little bit broader than emotion. So the way I would explain it is, one of the executives that approached me at one of the conferences I spoke at is an executive at the largest Australian auto insurance company. So an auto insurance company is very interested in making sure you as a driver are actually totally focused on driving, not talking, not texting, or drowsing. So they're talking to us about how do we ensure first, monitor, how do we detect if you're in fact distracted. And then more importantly, it's once you understand the emotional state and the context and the cognitive load, what do we actually do about that? So it's about habits and it's about change in behavior. So there's a whole science of arena that we're actually trying to attack, which is behavioral change. And that goes for retail as well. Essentially what they're trying to do through these messaging, personalized, tailored promotions, offers, you name it, is to get you to do something on a repeated, perpetual basis. So we're really thinking hard about that habit components and what it means. And because, for example, some of you want to lose weight, right? Well, if I give you my MyFitnessPal rulebook, playbook, it's going to be generic, but we need to actually get down to individual level and to understand what the levers and the motivation of you as an individual is, so that you actually follow through with your goal and your aspiration. That's the same thing with clothing. When we put on clothing, jewelry, why are we doing that? It's because we want to support a self-construct of who we are, an aspirational self that we want to perceive through our lens as well as through the lens of others. That's why we're doing it. So you don't position, clothing as, oh, it's on sale, go buy it. No, you position as, when you put this on, when you're affiliated and associated with this brand, you're personifying a self that you like to become, or you like to reinforce. That's the area that we're working on, using effective computing.
And I would say, to the clothing example, I think it's both. Tailoring back, again, to the customer that you're dealing with. If you have a gentleman of a certain age, he's looking for a very practical shirt. Potentially he needs somewhere to hide his notebook, he wants 2 pockets. This is my father, by the way. He doesn't really care what it looks like, what it's made of. He just wants 2 pockets so he can put his phone in one and his reading glasses in the other. To a different customer, potentially a younger customer, it is all about the brand and the persona that's going to project. In terms of the emotional versus functional, candidly, I feel like we're only scratching the surface on both of them. The opportunity is endless in each, and I couldn't prioritize one or the other.
Good. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the ultimate promise of technology in retail. So down the road, we want to be able to have anything, anywhere, at any time, right? So then, how are brands and retailers going to compete? Like we have a list here: better implementation, better experience design, better products, or better services or pricing. So how do you think this is going to break down? Because if everything's available to everybody all the time, then what does that really look like in terms of the people that are providing these things? So anybody?
Well, I will say, I will go back to saying one of my examples of Macy's.com preparing for this future, which is ensuring we have a seamless experience both in store and online. So I think that was one of our strategic decisions to, prepare for that.
Right.
So I think that's one of the things that we're doing is making sure that the customer feels when they're in our stores, as well as they're in shopping via any of their devices, that it's the same. So I think that's one of the first things that any traditional retailer will have to ensure that's correct.
Do you think there's going to be a more emphasis on unique experience and unique product? If you can have anything anytime, right? So a lot
like
of that
3D printing,
or if you have brands, you have you're the only one that has this particular brand, this particular product, or this level of product too. So you can do that. So it'd be an emphasis on better product overall.
I think we can start, again, I can't really talk about some of our strategies, but I think we're starting to, at least online, cater for, and Amazon, does this, and other retailers provide customers a personalized experience. So we're starting with online, and hopefully that data will then drive more of a segmented experience for the customers in store. I don't know if that made any sense.
Well, another way to think about the ability to have anything anywhere at any time. Right now, the legacy infrastructure around retail is the largest in the world or something probably, right? But you have distribution channels, you have all kinds of channel obfuscation, right? So, you have all these different ways of getting things, and if that all clears away, right, then what does the world look like, and how is everybody going to be doing, competing? You don't have channel disruption, or
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is fluidity, right? So the other aspect is symmetric information. So if if you have a all equivalent environment,
right,
the way you compete is through the end experience. Whichever retailer that can actually provide the most tailored experience, that's the winner. So I'll give you an example, and this also ties in with O2O that I referenced earlier, is one of the things we're experimenting is live events. So as a consumer, your brand engagement is heightened in a physical live environment. For example, a concert, or maybe Porsche or Rolls-Royce is doing a car show, for example. Well, we can actually put in IoT and wearables and understand how you're actually moving about the display, how you're actually trying on the VR glasses and test driving your Porsche virtually, and get all those inputs and data. Moreover, before you even come to the actual physical live event, we can actually take the data from the CMS system or the CRM system and know in advance who you are from a persona, the typical journey map, and all these things that we would, again, segment out. And then we add the offline data to weave that in to make it into O2O. Moreover, at the actual event, let's talk about the example of the Porsche. If we understand which model and make and color and accessories really compelled and really that person gravitated towards, that means either during the event you can unlock certain things that has interaction with social media, or when that person leaves, you know exactly which product you can actually target them and know that there's a higher conversion rate. One of the problems, going a little bit tangentially, is this notion of retargeting in the blind. Advertisers spend so much money retargeting. Give you an example. I'm looking at an iPhone 6 online. What they don't know is that once I close my laptop and that cookie has been suspended, they don't know that I actually drove to an Apple store and purchased it. But yet I keep on getting messaging on my phone or my PC or wherever that you need to buy an iPhone. But they don't recognize that I just bought it. That's a classic example of this lack of integration between online and offline and the opportunity to really create a unified experience that's targeted to that individual, and it's about timing and it's about their need.
Anybody else?
But I think, sometimes the answer to the question is technology and sometimes it's not. In the case of the retail example, if assuming all the channels, technology are equal, how do you differentiate? And I would say for a retailer, especially in fashion, exclusive merchandise and merchandise collaboration does help. Apologize in advance to the Walmart friend. Target has been quite successful. I have to apologize. You can learn it.
No issues.
Yeah. You know, their designer collaboration have been their bacon saver for the last couple of years. They've had some misses, but in general, you know, last couple of collaborations they've done, they've driven huge amounts of traffic and, you know, done some good business. So if you do have, and those products they were kind of adjusted for the segment because they're taking high-end designer and adjusting it to a Walmart, to a Target pricing. But they're not personalized. But it's really about grabbing a segment of customers, not necessarily needing to get it down to the personalized level, but you can get it to a tailored segment level and giving that group a set of products and offers that they want. I think sometimes there's a little too much obsession is I need to get down to the individual. And sometimes I think, yeah, you're trying to sell a Porsche or you're trying to sell something very high-end, but for a lot of retailers, that's just not practical. There are certain things like online, a little easier to do it online, obviously. I think the technology, Amazon really managed to drive down the cost of personalization technology. I think there was a panel last time about it. But some of the more complicated one-to-one offer at the store level, sometimes you'll take a step back and say, is what you're selling worth it? Or you go for a segment base. I don't know, retailer.
Well, yeah, I would say a few things. The one thing that didn't come up in your question is that implementation, experience, design, products, services, pricing was trust, right? And so I can't emphasize trust enough and the importance of gaining the customer's trust. In the retailer that you mentioned, I can't remember who it was, you know, who I think recently had a data breach issue. Those types of things can, you know, cause trust challenges. And even though you might want that exclusive product, if you're too nervous to give them your credit card, you stop right there. Whoever it might be.
Yeah.
So
retail humor. That's the experience.
But you know, so I think it's about trust. Obviously, all else being equal, it's about pricing. And then I do think, you know, the personalization element, to your point, you know, is it about knowing that customer? You can do segmentation, but you know, you mentioned earlier you've got to stop and pick up paper towels. There's a brand of paper towels that you get every time, so let me serve you up that, because what I really want you to do is buy paper towels and maybe toilet paper and toothpaste and 10 other things, but serving up 20 kinds of paper towels isn't going to get you to do that, because I already know the exact ones that you want, so I'm going to show you those, and then a portfolio of other products to try to get your ring a little bit higher. Again, make it simpler for you.
Right. And online is a lot easier to do it than offline. I think online is where the technology, and Internet of Things on the tying to online is still very infancy right now.
Let's talk a little bit about business model transformation. So if you can have anything, anywhere, at any time, right? Are we going to see a stronger push toward verticals again? In order to talk about unique product, controlling actually the product and the element in order to have a unique offering, a unique experience, right? So vertical integration of brands or companies?
You know, I don't think so. That's just my take on it. I don't think so. I think it comes back to the trust element and to be able to get everything at one time. So you know what, I don't want to go to P&G for one product, come back to someone else for a different product, come to Macy's for a Macy's branded product. That's too much work for me, right? So whether it's online or in a brick and mortar environment, I don't want to go to 10 different places. I need to do it once, have one simple thing, and I'm done. That might just be
So I'm trying to understand the question. Are you asking whether or not retailers should be vertically integrated, i.e. private label everything? Is that what your question is?
Yes, or for brand, or if you're a new brand, you know, say you outsource everything. Does the Internet of Things, like a connected system, lead necessarily to, you know, disparate parts, or are we going to see a push toward more vertical integration, controlling everything from, you know, the raw materials on up again in order to have a unique offering? And the other follow-up, when we're talking about kind of emotions and how people buy it, we did a panel event on kind of social value driver, right? So because as people move up the socioeconomic ladder, they have more money to spend, they become a little choosier. They want their dollar spent to mean something, so they align this kind of social value brand or something, sustainability or this kind of things like that. And for those type of retailers, it often makes sense that they necessarily need to be vertically integrated and control every aspect so that they can guarantee that certain experience and product that people are going to be spending.
So I misunderstood your question. I think the supply chain element is entirely different in controlling everything from the raw materials, and I think that's coming anyway.
Right.
The increased visibility that the Internet of Things allows to that will play that forward, but it almost, in my opinion, makes for less of a need to be vertical because they have this increased visibility.
You can track and trace it by vendor management. You don't have to own the vendor, you just have to manage it.
Right.
Okay.
I think, again, to me, it comes a little bit back to that business model question. I think you take, extreme example is Apple, of course, and they own their own retail and they control it end to end, and it's partly a brand play. I think a really good example recently is Best Buy, that is really, as a clearly, a company was under pressure, but moving to a heavy showrooming component. And you could think of that as a pseudo vertical where companies are saying, I've got a new product, or I've got whatever product it is, Bose headphones, I own a big chunk of that, I own a big piece of the shelf, I merchandise it how I want, I pay money for it, it's like a mini store to me. And I think you will see more showrooming within the store because the economics of that work for the store themselves, because there are products that you want to touch and feel, and the only place to do it is in the retail environment. So I don't think you'll see it quite as extreme as a complete vertical integration, but you will see more cohesive plans around in-store showroom.
So let's just talk about this project. So what new retail models, service